Okay, so one of the first things we're going to do when we get a property, I call it a sniff test, is I don't want to spend very much time on any one property when I'm looking at it initially, because most of them aren't deals, frankly. Those of you who come up out of the residential real estate world know that you have to look at an awful lot of properties before you find one that really works. And it's the same thing in commercial. So our sniff test, the three big numbers we're going to pay attention to is N, that's the net operating income, value, which is the asking price, right? And C is capitalization rate, or R. It's also called R, cap rate R, all right? So we can use either of these. So the value is the asking price. The cap rate is the return you would see on your money if you bought the property for cash. So if you know two of these numbers, you can calculate the third. And that's the whole basis of the sniff test. We don't need or want a lot of information for the sniff test. What we're trying to do is to quickly see if this makes any sense for us or not. All right? So what we're typically going to do, let me see if I can move this down. When you are looking at properties, this is what you need, some or all of this. You don't need everything. So what you want to look at is the actual gross income or the number of units with a current vacancy. Now, vacancy rate, typically what brokers and other people are going to do is they are going to give you the number of units that are not occupied, that are physically not occupied. That is the physical vacancy. Unfortunately, we have something that's known as the economic vacancy as well. And that is the economic vacancy is people who haven't paid their rent, people who are they're working for you and they get half of their property free, half of their unit free. They have a concession so they don't have to pay a certain month's rent. So all of those lead to economic vacancy. And so we typically combine those. Be aware, though, when you are looking at an offering, when it talks about vacancy, you need to know what both the physical and the economic vacancy is. Except I don't need to know at this minute. What I need to know is what can I use to drop in. And I typically use 10% as a physical and economic vacancy. Another point to be aware of, however, is if you're buying something that is 70% occupied, meaning it's 30% vacancy, then you're not going to add another 10%. You add something for economic, but it's already 30% vacant. So don't add another 10% in. Or you need the actual expenses or the calculated expenses. They can give you the actual NOI, but be careful of this because that doesn't tell you what the expenses actually are. So there are some people who are running, or they're telling you they're running a property at 25% expenses. That's probably either not true or they're doing a lot of the work themselves. And so they don't have management expenses, they don't have repair and maintenance expenses, etc., etc. So typically the things that I think that are most useful to me is I want to begin with this. I want the number of units via a current rent roll. And that should include the number of units, the rents for each unit, whether it is occupied or vacant, and if there is bad debt or it's complementary. So I just want a full rent roll. And I want the asking price. It would be nice if they give you the actual trailing 12. So here's a word, here's one of the vocabulary words you need to learn, a trailing 12. That's used ubiquitously in commercial real estate. And what it means is the last 12 months by month, what the income is and what the expenses are. A lot of times, brokers and other people are not going to give you the trailing 12 initially. If I know get a current rent roll that includes this and the asking price, I can figure out generally what I can offer. And so that helps me a lot. So if I am looking at let me see if I can go, let's see. I'm going to come back up here for just a minute. And let's just going to say, so if I have an apartment building and it is an average kind of apartment building, my expenses that include all of my expenses and a vacancy is going to be about 50%. That means about 40% expenses and about 10% on a vacancy. It can be more. It is almost never less. So I'm going to use 50%. For a mobile home park, I'm going to use an expense and a vacancy of about 45%. Unless most of the homes are owned by the property. So you have mobile home parks that are where the homes are owned by the residents, and you have mobile home parks where the majority of the homes are owned by the owner. If the majority of homes are owned by you or the owner, your expenses are going to look very much like apartments, and so you need to use 50%. If the majority of them are owner occupied, you are not going to be responsible for all the repairs and maintenance, and so your expenses are going to be less. I would use 45%. In self-storage, they are the cheapest to run expense-wise because you're going to use a lot of technology in those for the gates and for renting and stuff like that. So your expenses tend to be 35 to 40%. And you're going to make your offer based on those kind of expenses, or you're going to at least not make an offer. You're going to do your initial sniff test using those expenses. But you at least need this. You at least need the current rent roll, and you need the asking price. Okay, so the importance of the NOI. I said we'd come back to this. The value of any property is based on the net operating income. And we already talked about it's defined as a total income minus all expenses except reserves, mortgage, and interest on the mortgage. Even if the property is 100% occupied, we always calculate a 10% vacancy factor. You're always going to have turnover. A lot of times you have concessions. You're always going to have some people who don't pay. I'm always going to use at least 10%. If they give you the actual gross income, we can use that, and there's basically no problem with that. So what we're going to do, I want everybody to get out a piece of paper and a pencil, and we're actually going to do a little example here. So this is actually a sniff test that I'm using here. So we're going to just very quickly do an initial assessment to see if this is something worth pursuing more. So this is a 54-unit apartment building in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's 98% occupied. They're asking $2,400,000. So if all apartments are rented all year and there is no bad debt, there is no turnover, The most this property could make is $35,000 in income a year. So that's the potential gross, I'm sorry, this is monthly, potential monthly gross of $35,000. They report expenses at 40% of gross, so that's what we're going to use on this example. Okay, so I want you to sort of go through and figure out what the actual potential gross is. Let me kind of turn this over. Okay, so we're going to come back here, we're going to answer some basic questions about this property. So what is the annual potential gross income? So for that, I need to come back up here. And it says my monthly gross is $35,000. So I'm going to do everything in terms of a year. So I'm going to do $35,000 a month times 12 months. So my potential gross is $420,000. Okay. The next question, if we factor in a 10% vacancy, what is the gross? So we have a gross of $420,000. And if we're going to take 10% off of that, that is $42,000. That leaves me with a 10% vacancy, a gross of $378,000. So that's my gross. What would you expect the expenses to be? So we said up here, they said the expenses are 40% of the gross, and that's what we're going to use. So my 40% of the gross, my so my expenses, if I'm going to use 40% expenses, my gross, we said, is $378,000, and I'm going to multiply that times 0.4. So my expenses are $151,200. So then what is my NOI going to be? My NOI is going to be my gross minus my expenses. So it's $378,000 minus $151,200. That's $226,800. That is my net operating income. All right. So now, if we can buy at an 8 cap rate, how much can we pay? So how do we get there? So I take my net operating income. And remember we said the net operating income, let me see if I can come back up here to my formula. Where is my formula? Okay. So my net operating income is $268,000. And I can pay an 8% cap rate. So that's here. So it is $226,800. Say that again, $226,800 divided by 0.08. That's the cap rate. I can pay 8% on a cap rate. That gives me how much I can pay for this property. So if I am, so now I come back down here. So how much can we pay? So I'm going to go $226,800 divided by 0.08. That's $2,835,000. So do we want to pursue this? They're asking a $2.4 million. I think that is a resounding yes. We would want to pursue that. And an 8% cap rate these days is a really good cap rate. So I would be going into this thinking there's probably something else they're not telling me that I need to know about.